Welcome to that Wall Street Tribe. You are going to want to know this neighbor. Mr. Joseph Woodbury is in the house. Joseph, so glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, Joey, it sounded like you're giving him like a Mr. Rogers intro there. Sorry about that, Joseph, but I think
Hey, farm intro. Yeah, come on.
It's a fun conversation. So, Joseph, for those who don't know what neighbor.com is, give a little backdrop and let's jump into why this is important for them to learn.
Yeah, sure. It's neighbor.com. We're a nationwide storage and parking marketplace. So we've built a platform where people can take their extra space, whether that's a garage or a shed or a driveway, or even a larger real estate portfolio, and they can rent it out on our platform. We'll park your neighbor's boat on your driveway or their stuff in your garage. It's really cool passive income strategy.
So you mentioned boat. I love boats. So if I allow my neighbor to park his boat on there, do I get the access to the keys and I just get to use it during time? And there's some reciprocal there. I can like dock his rent down a little bit or
yeah. So that's prohibited in our terms of service, although you're welcome to work out whatever you want with your neighbor. But no, it'll just stay parked there close by. It's a lot easier than driving a half hour over, other side of town to your storage unit to go get it. So we like the convenience.
Not shocking, Joseph, that Russ was able to immediately find something that went against your terms of service. He's the idea guy for a reason. But to talk to me, I think immediately when I hear about this platform, a lot of questions come to mind. And I'm sure you're not, you're used to this because this is a new concept for many. When it comes to someone parking their stuff on my property, I immediately think liability. I immediately think, how do I end up paying for something that gets stolen off of my land or something to that nature? Talk to us about how that works with neighbor.com.
Sure. And we're super grateful for the marketplace pioneers that went before us in this space. You look at Airbnb, where people are literally going into someone's home and sleeping there. Or, I take a flight to Chicago, I don't have a car, and I call an Uber and I get in a car with an absolute stranger. That's crazy. I still can't believe we use Uber. It's pretty insane that we get in that car. Neighbor, we're super lucky that way. It's a lot lower liability threshold to think about, just parking your camper trailer on your neighbor's RV pad. There's a lot less that can go wrong than if you're sleeping in someone's home. But of course, liability is our most important service. That's what we do as a platform, is we sell trust. Our hosts sell space and we sell trust. So we're the only storage company I'm aware of in the country that offers up to $50,000 in protection for your items while they're being stored. We ID verify our hosts. They go through a big vetting process before they sign up. Your hosts are able to see everything that the renter is going to be storing at their space, and they get to approve that before the renter moves in. So there's a lot of safety and security. That's part of the reason people use Neighbor, is so that we can make sure it's this really, really safe transaction.
If you've listened to our show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about infinite banking and how we were able to use that concept to create over $50,000 a month in passive income. But it's just not that easy to figure out, how does this all connect into my own personal system?
Stallion, that's why we created the passive income operating system, bro. It shows you how to turn active income into passive income. It makes all the steps come together. If you would like to get access to it as a podcast listener, we've never given this away in public before, go to what'swhatwallstreet.com/PIOS.
Give us the origin story behind this. It's kind of interesting. Where did this originate from?
Yes, my co-founder had the idea really from having the need himself, which I think is where most good ideas come from, is just having the pain. He and his wife got married, and about a week after they got married, they flew down to South America to work for this humanitarian org. So you can imagine, you just get married, you haven't even really combined your stuff yet, and they needed a place to store their items while they were gone. They looked into getting a storage unit and had a really difficult time finding one with any vacancy. And that's because storage is like 95% occupied nationwide. And the ones that were vacant were charging a lot of money. So he called some friends and said, hey, could I store my stuff at your place? He found a friend that let him store in his garage. Fast forward 4 months later, he goes to pick his items up, And he just has the thought, this was such a better experience. I felt so much safer in a nice, clean garage in a neighborhood I trusted than in one of those dirty storage units across town. Plus, I saved a ton of money. Why isn't everyone doing this? There's got to be space in every neighborhood in the country. Why hasn't someone built a way to find it, a marketplace or a directory where you could look up who's got space in your neighborhood, be so much cheaper, so much more accessible, you want your stuff close to you. You don't want it far away.
One of the questions I have with this, what sort of rules do you have to are governing this, if any? I just think of Joey and I, we were running a short-term rental business. We bought a house in my neighborhood, and there was no covenants against, at the time, in the city about us being able to use it. But then when we talked about, turning it into a short-term rental, all hell broke loose. So Are there any rules governing, in essence, running, I don't know, is this classified as a business out of your house if you're having people come and, use your garage as their storage facility?
Yeah, that's another area where I feel like we're super advantaged. You look at Airbnb, a lot of the laws around prohibiting short-term rentals come from housing displacement, right? That's the objective. When New York outlaws it, their fear is that Airbnb is driving up the cost of housing and displacing residents, right? Our service doesn't do that. We're just working with space that was already sitting there totally empty, unmonetized. It's like the purest form of an underutilized asset, and we're renting it out. So there's no laws against doing this. Really, the only legal framework around storage in the country is each state regulates eviction. So if someone decides to stop paying, you can't just throw those items away. Now, unlike a long-term rental, you don't have these egregious, takes 6 months to get someone out. We can get them out in a very expedited fashion, but you do have to follow a certain procedure, and we do that on behalf of our hosts. So we can have any renter out of your space within 30 to 60 days, and we make sure to follow each state's code that way. We actually guarantee your payments as well. It's one of the cool things about using Neighbor is if you're going through Neighbor, even though the renter stops paying us, we'll keep paying you.
No, that is super interesting. And I know you've mentioned a couple of different applications just to give people bigger exposure to how this world works. You mentioned garage space for storing items. You mentioned your neighbor's RV on your RV pad, for instance. What are some of the other applications people use Neighbor for?
Yeah, it goes from the smallest of spaces. In New York, we have individuals that literally rent out their closet. Or I saw one the other day, someone rented out the space underneath their bed, and it got rented because space is at such a premium in New York. All the way up to, we have 20, 30, $40 billion real estate REITs that are renting out space at all of their properties nationwide. We work with the largest multifamily REITs in the country, the largest retail REITs in the country, a lot of the largest office owners. And you think of multifamily building, an apartment complex, the owner likely has extra parking that the tenants aren't using. The city made them build so many parking spots, they don't get used. We rent those out for vehicle storage. Oftentimes in apartment complex, they actually build storage lockers on site as a tenant amenity. Those tend to be 20 to 30% occupied at best. And so we take the other 70% and rent it out and get it to 90% occupancy by renting it out to the community. And so those large property owners, they can earn millions and millions of dollars in ancillary income on our platform, all the way down to that residential user that's got their RV pad that's maybe earning $5,000 a year and everything in between. We have small businesses that rent out space. We have people that kind of become what we call power users or power hosts, that they get addicted to this income. They use it on a rental property, and then they roll it out to 10 rental properties, and then they start buying dedicated Neighbor spaces, and all of a sudden they're earning $100,000 a year on the platform or something like that.
This is just one of those things that gets the ideas rolling. What other ways? I own a warehouse, I own a commercial building, I own a multifamily place. What other ways can I add revenue to what I own, which only enhances profit and, value to the business itself? So I start thinking through this, and, of course, the skeptic has to come out first, because I was one of those people that did the Turo And, I was like, oh, this is going to be brilliant. No problems are going to happen. And then I go pick up my truck for the first time and I'm like, oh, man, I had smelled that much weed smoke since I was in New York City. Like I was a little unexpected on that. So what are the, talk a little bit about the things that happen. I'm just thinking, like, if I were to rent out my garage to somebody, are there limitations to the frequency in which they can come? Is there timing? Like if it was just a lot, in a commercial building I had, I wouldn't care if they came and picked up their car and moved it, whatever. It wouldn't bother me. But if they were using my garage, for instance, or something that maybe a little more intimate, like if I lived out on a farm and they were coming out there driving up at night or whatever, how do you deal with those sort of issues?
Yeah. So when you sign up as a host, you're going to go through this full kind of property onboarding. And two of the questions that we're going to ask you is, when do you want to allow access to the space? And that could be, only during business hours or after hours or by appointment only, things like that. You can customize that. And then we're going to ask you, how frequently can they access the space? And you could say daily, monthly, weekly, whatever you want there. It turns out that storage, you don't store things that you need frequent access to. You keep those items at your home or at your business. You store things that you need less regular access to. So access tends to be one of those things that hosts have questions about when they're signing up. And then once they start using the platform, they never have questions because access is typically a lot less frequent than they anticipated it would be. I don't know if you've ever had a storage unit, but if you have, think about how often you access things. A lot of people access it once every 6 months or so. So access doesn't tend to be a problem on the platform.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my attic right now. I'm like, man, if I just got rid of all the junk that was in my attic, I could just sell space to Joey and his family so they could put their junk in my attic.
Yeah, that's right. It is. It's well, and this is cool because it's hyper local as well. I mean, you stay in an Airbnb in another town where you don't live. You may chat with the host or you may chat with your Uber driver, but you're probably never going to see that person again. Whereas neighbor, you really are helping a neighbor out. It's someone close by. You try to store items close to you, and it's a longer term relationship. People store not for 15 minutes or 2 days like Airbnb. They store for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. I mean, we have users that started with us in 2018 that are still storing today and haven't left. And so it's a real opportunity to kind of get to know your neighbors, which is fun. There's a lot more safety in that as well. These are people or people that know them. They're close by.
Talk to us a little bit about the income opportunity, right? Let's go through some real examples. I know you gave some crazy ones like with the REITs and millions of dollars, but for the person listening right now, if they were going to take, a lot that they owned, maybe a garage or something like it would be maybe a more normal use case, what sort of income are you seeing the people on your platform making?
Yeah. So a few different examples I'll give. We have one user I'm thinking of was trying to save for a new car and needed $3,000 for a new car. Had an empty garage space that he wasn't using, partly because he was saving for this new car. He rented that out. He earned about $200 a month for that garage. And it took him about, 15, 20 months to earn the dollars for that car by renting out that space. So about 1.5 years to earn that up. We have other users, another user that we saw an interview come through the other day needed to pay for their daughter's preschool. They wanted to send their daughter to this preschool. They didn't have the money. It was going to be $300 a month. And they just decided, okay, we can't afford it. We're not going to send them there. And then he saw a Facebook ad for neighbor the next day. He went and punched in his space at his house and it was $300 a month. And all of a sudden, he went to his wife and he said, we're sending our daughter to preschool. Neighbor pays for it every single month. Then you have users that decide to do this a little more professionally. Maybe they use us on a rental property and the rent they're earning on that property is $2,300 and their mortgage is $2,000. So their net earnings is $300. And they tack on another $300 a month through neighbor. We just doubled the net earning on that rental property because it's just straight to the bottom line. and they start using us. Well, if you start to crunch the numbers, maybe I'll use Salt Lake as an example. We're based out of Salt Lake, so I can speak to some of these numbers. If you were to buy a townhome in Utah, that's going to run you about $500K. And if you were to rent that out as a long-term rental property, you'd maybe earn $2,000 to $2,500 a month. So call it $25, $30K in annual rent. If you were to instead list that townhome as a short-term rental property, maybe you could increase your earnings there. Maybe it's north of 30K. If it's in the right location, maybe 40K a year in annual earnings to that property. But instead, if you took that same amount of money that would have cost to buy that townhome and you bought a vacant lot, you could buy somewhere between an acre to 2 acres of land in Utah. And by renting that out for long-term vehicle storage, you'd earn around $100,000 a year. So you'll get these investors that start using us on a couple properties to double their net earnings. And then they're like, wait a second, I should just be investing in neighbor properties. I'll actually earn a higher yield on my capital than buying that next rental property. I should just buy a dedicated lot for a neighbor.
There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, pop quiz day. Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared, though, for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz.
My immediate idea was exactly what you just mentioned, is just finding lots. I think those are probably the most underutilized type of asset class in our area. Like they don't probably hold as much value, especially if they're off the beaten path. Like if they're not on a major commercial highway, people probably don't value them as the same amount. But for something like long-term vehicle storage, it would be super valuable to that end user. And so, but the immediate question that comes to mind with that is, what sort of things would I either be required by a neighbor to have put in place for that lot, let's say, or that the end user would, typically be looking for? Like, would I be needing to add fencing? Would I need to add security systems and lighting and all that? Like that immediately would go to my question is how good is this end investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is there are no requirements. We have unpaved dirt lots, farmland. We have a teacher, actually, middle school teacher in Salt Lake, had some extra land next to her home, and she's earning about $10,000 a year. She stores about 10 vehicles, 10 camper trailers on that land, earns about $10,000 a year on that property. That's huge for her. You've got to think, like, what's her income? $40K a year, $40K a year, earning an extra $10,000. That's huge. And that's an unimproved lot. People are willing to rent it. Like if someone is willing to rent it and it works for them, you'll earn money. That said, you're going to maximize your margins with just a little improvement. We recommend at least putting gravel down, which can be very cheap. Paving a lot is also not very expensive. Putting a fence up, all of a sudden you get our security badge on your listing to say this is like a locked, secure area. Your earnings go up and our recommended price to you goes up. And fencing can cost as little as $1 a square foot for the lot. So it's not like putting up a fence is really going to put you out of pocket, especially when it can really increase your earnings on the property.
I know I asked this question before, but I got to come back to it. So you mentioned that. So let's just say, and I've got 30 acres and I've got about an acre grassed area that I could go and I could put gravel on. I could put a fence around it. To me, I feel like now what have I created? I created a storage facility. Are there any zoning requirements now for me creating a storage facility as compared to before? If I just allow people to come out there, I'm just wondering, like, as I make these improvements, as I make it look more like what it's becoming, am I having to make sure that the zoning requirements, that I'm not going from residential or farm or whatever into whatever criteria that zoning would fall into?
Yeah, sure. And absolutely. If you're going to do a larger project, we definitely recommend checking your local municipal code, just as you would with any marketplace, whether you're doing an Airbnb or anything, we'd recommend checking with that. You'd be surprised, though, how allowable the use case are, especially when you're just a normal residential user using it on your own property. The storage is one of those industries. We like to say Airbnb is in the business of storing people. And of course, Uber's in the business of transporting people. And anytime you're dealing with people, the regulations go up, right? There's a lot of regulations around room and board and hospitality taxes and things like that, or transportation of people, because there's safety issues involved. The regulations really go down when you're dealing with items, because we're a lot more concerned as a society about people than we are items, fortunately. And so there's a lot more allowable use cases for you to be able to store. I mean, you could put your own vehicles there. So putting someone else's vehicles is not much different.
I meant a second ago, you talked about a couple of examples where people were, finding these lots that they already own and coming up with the revenue. Do you have any sort of tools that would help them? Like, I just remember when we were on Turo, it kind of gave me some examples of what to expect if I were to buy X car in, Y city. Do you guys have tools like that I would be able to figure out what my space might be worth?
Definitely. Yeah. And in fact, we will automatically pull you into these tools. If you go to list a space on our platform and you select that you want to list a parking lot or an unpaved lot or one of these classifications, we'll pull up a tool that we call Blueprint. And when you type in the address, we'll actually pull up a satellite image of your lot so you can see it. And then we give you tools to actually design your parking lot and lay out how many parking spots. And it's as easy as dragging it. And you can tilt them so they're diagonal to where you can fit the most parking spots in and create driving lanes in between them. And as you add spaces to that lot, you can do this in 5 minutes. It's really quick. We have a little number up in the top right that'll be your projected earnings. And we'll tell you how much you're going to earn off of this lot. And so you can know before you even buy the space or list the space, you can have a pretty good idea of what you'd expect to earn on a property. And of course, if you've got a larger portfolio, like we get people that have dozens of properties, we can actually just set you up with an account representative at Neighbor who can do a full analysis on your portfolio, property by property, and we'll just send you a projected earnings, a free portfolio review for you.
All right, tribe. So we're talking today about this neighbor.com platform. I want to encourage you to go visit wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/neighbor to get more details about what we're talking about, how to connect with Joseph and his team, and just anything else that we can find valuable to provide there. But I have to ask you before we, start winding down, Joseph, I got to head off Russ at the pass here because he's immediately going to get off this podcast and have like a million ideas. He's going to be like, Joey, hey, I'm going out. I'm driving to go check out these lots. I need to know, what is the worst things that have happened to people that took advantage of this? Like, tell me how this doesn't work or how this becomes a problem.
Yeah. I mean, probably the worst things that I can think of are things that would happen at any storage facility. Obviously, the worst case scenario when you're storing items is that something happens to your items. And I'm gonna spin this into a little advantage for Neighbor, but the nationwide break-in rate for self-storage facilities is 1 in 10. So 1 in 10 storage facilities is broken into every single year. I was doing an interview with a reporter in San Diego a few months ago, and I told him that stat, and the reporter said to me, he's like, you don't need to tell me. I do about a story a month on a self-storage break-in. They're zoned industrial. You want the cheapest land you can get because they're all occupied anyway. You're going to get 95% occupancy, so you might as well bring down your land costs. And they're just kind of ripe for, you can drive up, clip a lock, and steal items. We're the largest by geography storage company in the country. We're the only storage company in the world that operates in all 50 states. And I could count on like hands the amount of break-ins we've had nationwide where like items were stolen. Of course, if those individuals signed up for our $50,000 in coverage, they were protected for those items. But that's the worst case scenario, right? Like that just creates headache for everyone. That creates headache for us. That creates headache for renters. That creates headaches for the host. But fortunately, these residential areas and these commercial areas even that aren't industrial, these are the safest areas in town. The FBI stats say that a residential home is about 15 times safer than a traditional self-storage facility if you look at break-in rates for residential homes. So your items are actually much better off being stored on someone's driveway or next to a multifamily building or a retail building than they are in some industrial part of town at a storage facility.
I love that. And just for the person who's going to be ambitious and opportunistic, and I remember with Turo, I was using a Publix parking lot to basically store the car, and people would come and pick it up there, and then I would go, I'd have my daughter go clean it at the car wash right next door, come back, drop it off, and we were just leaving it up there. It was being stored there.
Yeah.
How about the person who goes, "Oh, I got 3 or 4 spots. You can leave your car long term. It's in a really safe lit, area. It's right in front of this grocery store that I know." Like,
well,
how do you protect
go? I'll just mention, if you go, we're really close with the Turo team. Love what those guys are doing. Just an excellent business they've built. And I actually rent out my Turo car myself. My vehicle I rent out on Turo, and I also use it when I'm traveling because it's so much cheaper than a rental car. But if you go to Turo's website, they have a host services page where they recommend, like, here's where you should go get your car serviced if you're a Turo host, or here's how you can pass our annual inspection. Here's some vendors you can use. We are listed on there. We're Turo's preferred storage provider. So we get a lot of large Turo fleets, guys that own 50 vehicles, and they'll come on our platform. We'll help them find storage right near that airport where they can store their fleet. We actually had a woman in Hawaii, a really cool story. She started small on the platform. She just started earning a few bucks, passive income on the platform, but she was one of those that kind of got addicted and bought a larger lot next to the airport there. She earns $125,000 a year renting out to Turo fleets through Neighbor. So love the connection to Turo.
Well, Joseph didn't want to answer my question, Tribe. He didn't want to say that that you can go up to your local grocery store and start using their lot as what you're going to then rent out off his platform. That would be illegal. That'd be unethical. You wouldn't want to do that. But I do like the idea that you said, if you are, because we have a lot of people that are doing Turo and are constantly trying to figure out where do they scale and how would they store those cars. Neighbor is a great idea. I hadn't even considered that connection there. Well, Tribe, thank you for listening. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story about Neighbor. Really interesting story, background behind it, and looking forward to seeing how we can personally use it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
All right, Tribe, go to what'swhatwallstreet.com/neighbor. Get all the details of how you can get connected. Then come into a community and tell us if you get your first listing on there. I'd love to see and track how that's working. Just another inspirational story of how you can start building passive income that could exceed your monthly expenses so you can become financially free. Have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.